Bioware has seen a number of different RPG games over the course of many years, with a multitude of different IPs across different genres, from Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Knights of the Old Republic, and Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. While some of these IPs are borrowed from different publishers, they have also made some memorable ones in-house as well. One of the most notable of these is Dragon Age. Originally starting back in 2009 with their first game, Dragon Age Origins, it was designed as a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, borrowing many of its system and RPG mechanics that the former series popularized many years ago. The game was highly praised for its dark fantasy setting, allowing players to immerse themselves in the world of Ferelden, and battling the Darkspawn Blight that threatens to destroy everything and everyone. The gameplay was also praised for its diverse and often layered mechanics, ranging from choosing dialogue, traditional RPG customization, complex spell and talent picking, challenging combat, and trying to get to 4th base with one of your companions.
Nice.
The game was also successful enough that 2 sequel games were produced, which did see a number of changes, both questionable and beneficial, but they were still fun games to play. Dragon Age Origins is easily one of my favorites among the RPG games that I've played back in the late 2000s, and is arguably the biggest reason for giving me an interest in the CRPG genre. Between that and Mass Effect, it was one of the games that made me enjoy the companion system, making me fall in love with a multitude of different characters and their charming personalities.
Your grasp of the obvious is remarkable.
But it's been 15 years since Dragon Age Origins was released on both PC and the 7th generation consoles, minus the Wii of course. Sorry my guy. Since then, there have been a nearly endless number of fantasy RPG games you could choose from, ranging from the more traditional CRPGs to the more action-oriented. Everything from the Pathfinder series, Pillars of Eternity, Divinity, Baldur's Gate, the worlds and their stories are endless. On the gameplay front, it still utilizes a more traditional system that borrows heavily from the original Baldur's Gate, and many other games that came after it have either enhanced or modified the system to make it more compelling and unique to their game. Even Baldur's Gate 3, although playing to Larian's design strengths from their notable works, opted for the more traditional turn-based approach to make it much more fitting as a Dungeons & Dragons style game. So with that said though, despite the number of games that came after it, does Dragon Age Origins still have enough in its tank to still make it meaningful? Does the game's mechanics and combat still feel fun to play even today? Do the stories of Ferelden still feel unique enough even 15 years after its release? Is Sten gonna kill me in my sleep because I forgot to give him his cookies 15 years ago? Well, let's take a look. Starting with the story, Dragon Age introduces you to the threat of the Darkspawn, a race of humanoid-tainted creatures that threaten to destroy the world of Thedas. Originally corrupted as a result of an ancient group of humans that intruded on the Maker's domain and tainting his golden city, they have since amassed in numbers over the course of many centuries, attempting to invade the surface of Thedas and destroy everything. These invasions, known as Blights, have only been thwarted thanks to an ancient order of warriors known as Grey Wardens, who combat the Darkspawn that periodically attempt to invade the surface world. You play as one of those Grey Wardens, whose job it is to unite the lands of Ferelden and bring the current blight to an end, all while trying to become best friends with each of your companions.
Well, and a good friend you are, Warden. I'll think about you if we ever... no, actually, that would be gross.
The world-ending story of Origins is a tale that is as old as fantasy itself, and isn't all that different from stories like The Lord of the Rings, for example. Heck, even Mass Effect used a similar premise with the Reapers. But what will get you hooked into Origins is the world. If you're the biggest fan of lore and learning history, Ferelden and its inhabitants are honestly some of the best reasons to return to or even get into Origins. The sheer amount of lore that is present in this game is massive, with codices upon codices that detail just about everything you could learn about Ferelden and the lands beyond it. You'll learn about Orlais, the Tevinter Imperium, the Free Marches, or places like Antiva, brimming with lore and stories that the game wants you to unearth. You'll learn about many different religions present throughout Thedas, the pantheon gods of the elves, the dwarven caste system, even the Chantry's many teachings and how everyone around Ferelden treats them. The world of Origin is so vast and many that you could spend nearly half of your playtime trying to learn all the lore and listen to all the conversations. Even when I've heard it all before, Leliana telling the stories of Orlais, Sten recounting his Qunari culture, or even the story of Flemeth as the Witch of the Wilds, These were stories that I was happy to hear again because it is these stories that helped shape the world of Thedas, and it was engrossing to hear them once more. But a story without its characters is simply a setting, and it's the characters of origin that help make the story. Before I talk about how the companions and the NPCs are the biggest contributing factors for the story, I actually want to talk about the protagonists first. Sure, they may be the silent type that basically has nothing but comments, questions, and violence to give everyone around them.
Was murdering a defenseless old man really necessary?
There's something I love about how Origins makes your protagonist feel unique. While I could say that this is just a matter of being the chosen one, which I feel like every RPG game kinda does to you anyway, it's the beginnings of the game that were an early standout for me. See, when you pick the origin of your character, just before they're whisked away to join their Grey Warden Order and follow the normal story path, you have the prelude of seeing how your character first starts out, with 6 different origin settings to choose from being a mage of the circle, a Dalish elf, or just a common cast dwarf. It's something that made me appreciate how the game treats your origin. Maybe it's just me and I'm missing some other game that does this in a similar manner, or I've just played too many RPG games where this is just simply the back of your character sheet, but a game that gives you the time of day for an introduction is such a nice surprise and something that I didn't expect to appreciate. This is also taken a step further when some of the characters in your introduction make an appearance later in the story. Speaking of characters, Origin's companions and NPCs are still some of the best you'll get to hear. The cast range from the most jovial and lighthearted to the most stern and serious, along with everyone else in between. Each of the companions that you recruit have their own uniqueness and peculiarities that give life to your party. Alistair may be the joking type, but he can get pretty serious when it comes to matters of family and friends.
I shouldn't have lost it, not when so much is riding on us, not with the blight and everything. I'm sorry.
Morrigan can be blunt and harsh, but her insights as a solitary figure can often lead to very meaningful and personal conversations.
There were nights when the wilds called to me, 'tis true. You look upon the world around you and you think you know it well. I have smelled it as a wolf, listened as a cat, prowled shadows that you never dreamed existed. But my life is as a human. I am under no illusions to the contrary.
The game has to be commended in its writing and voice directing for making the companions feel like real individuals. On the NPC side, you'll meet just about every type of personality that there is in Ferelden.
Enchantment? Enchantment!
The honorable, the kind, the devious, the downtrodden, the difficult, the crazy, the dirty, the insane, the righteous, the overly righteous, the difficult, whatever type of person you can name, Origins has you covered. There's an NPC for just about every situation that the game gives you, and all of them fit with the world. They've never felt out of place for me even when I've heard their dialogue before. Something specific that I thought was interesting about returning back to the game was actually the interaction between Terran Logain and King Cailan. In the story, and this is an early game spoiler, so please ignore the next couple of seconds if you'd rather not hear, King Cailan is betrayed by Terran Logain and he is left to die by the Darkspawn. When I first saw this betrayal 15 years ago, I was a bit young back then and was pretty much under the assumption that Terran Logain was a completely evil jerk who pretty much needed to die. Now after visiting the storyline again 15 years later, well, my thoughts on having this man dead hasn't changed, but my understanding of the character has. Hearing how he has a more idealistic approach to keeping Ferelden independent, as well as his history with the Orlesians, was something I actually re-evaluated as I approached the storyline. Sure, I think he's too stubborn with his forgiveness and his refusal for outside help, but my views on him weren't as completely black or white as I used to think. It also doesn't help that, looking at King Cailan again, yeah, he's a bit naive and gets a little too wrapped up in the glory, so I can kind of understand where Terran Logain gets a lot of his frustration from. I'm still gonna kill this man when I see him though. I still find it interesting though, how some years can actually change your perspective with certain story parts of the game. On the RPG side, you get to make your character, choosing one of 3 races and getting to customize your appearance in whatever shape you want. You start off as a rogue, warrior, or mage, with specialization into specific subclasses that you later unlock down the line. As mentioned before, you also get to pick your starting origin, which is tied to the race and class that you pick. For example, being a mage of either human or elf origin always lands you in the circle of magi, and being a dwarf rogue or warrior only lands you as either a noble or commoner. It's a shame though that you can't be a Kunari in this game, which you can only do in Inquisition. Next you have your stats, and most of these are self-explanatory with the type of class that you'll build. A DPS warrior using strength for example, or a DPS rogue using dex and cunning. It might be a little daunting if you're new to stat allocation in Origins, and I actually recommend you look up some stat allocation focus for the type of class that you want to go in. Because outside of modding the game, you're pretty much locked into whatever stats, talents, and spells that you choose. This is probably my only gripe on the RPG system when I came back to this game, as Origins pretty much wants you to lock your character into the specific role that you chose for them. Not to mention, there's no real class hybridization outside of some class-specific talents. I more or less knew this coming back to this game, so I had to make sure I built accordingly, and thankfully I had no issues on this playthrough. But something to keep in mind if you're thinking about builds when coming into this game. When you're finally done making your character the way you want, it's off to the introduction. Your interactions and starting location will vary based on your origin, but the overall purpose of teaching you the mechanics of gameplay and combat remain the same. Combat can definitely be one of the more complicated aspects if you're not familiar with real-time pause systems. At its base, you control a character to select a target and use whatever ability you wish, either to auto-attack, use a spell or talent, buff or debuff, and combat ends as soon as all enemy targets on the field are dead. What Origins also has is a traditional aggro system where enemies will specifically target a character to attack based on how much threat they generate. This ultimately results in your party needing to have a proper composition that will let you tank hits while being able to sustain injuries during combat. Balancing tanking, DPS, and healing, and who you choose in your party, along with the abilities that they have, will make or break the game for you. The complicated part is making everything work, since real-time combat means you have to micromanage multiple characters simultaneously. It can feel overwhelming since literally anything and everything is happening all at once. But that's where the pause system comes into play to make things a lot easier. During pause, you can queue actions for multiple characters to have them immediately perform them as soon as you unpause, making things a lot easier to manage. This is essential because the game is kind of unapologetic with trying to kill you. Enemies can be unrelenting with their attacks, spells, and even the number of bodies that they throw at you, so you pretty much have to be ready with a plan or properly prepared in order to win. This can also be further aided with tactics and commands that will let the characters automatically perform actions without you doing so. It's very helpful in situations where you need to focus your attention on specific parts of the battle while letting the AI handle other things, like drinking a health potion when their health is low, or using a stun when enemies get too close. You can also go into an isometric perspective to make viewing the battlefield much easier. It certainly helped me a couple times when the third-person camera was too restrictive. All else fails and you're having a hard time in combat, use your God-given right as a PC player to quick save and quick load.
This right here is my favorite thing.
I think the combat portion of Origins will either make you hate it or love it. For me, coming back to a real-time pause system was actually not that hard, and was actually kind of refreshing to play. The mix of managing attacks, spell combinations, and positioning made me enjoy the combat because of how tactical it felt. When you get everything to work, the win feels very satisfying, especially with how unapologetically difficult enemies are in this game. I also enjoyed how fast the moment-to-moment actions were, since abilities and cooldowns refresh pretty quickly. Not to mention your health, mana, and stamina also regenerate outside of combat, so you're pretty much ready for the next fight almost immediately. I'd say the combat held up pretty well, though some may find it a bit awkward since abilities and auto-attacks pretty much need the characters to stand still in order to perform them, which is something that its sequels tried to update in order to make it feel more impactful. But this staticness is kind of essential in order for abilities to connect and feel important. A bit more of a strategy and tactical game rather than a straight up action game is how I like to think about it. Though I'm not gonna lie, there are some dumb things you can exploit thanks to the tracking. On the RPG adventure side of things, it's more or less standard. Go through the world, get loot, get equipment, get side quests, fetch items to complete side quests, converse with or kill people to complete said side quests, get your reward, and complain about the backpack system using space rather than weight. When it comes to the more focused roleplay, you'll be performing skills and attribute checks to pass certain conditions and events. Unlike other RPG check systems, Origins is more straightforward in the sense that you simply have to meet the required value in order to pass. The good and bad side of this is that you either meet the requirements or you don't. On the plus side, this pretty much means that it's a guaranteed pass if you meet the requirements, rather than the possibility of failing due to a dice roll check. On the other hand, this means that you're just flat out locked out of an option since you don't meet the requirements, and there's no chance of luck to help you. Some may not like the binary system, and the lack of luck involved doesn't exactly make things exciting for certain checks, but take it for what you will. When you're not exploring the world, you'll also be spending time trying to get to know your companions and winning their approval. While technically optional on the gameplay front, the benefits, outside of being friends with, is that companions will receive a bonus to their primary attribute, which will also increase as their approval goes up. Alistair will become more tanky thanks to an increase in constitution, and Morrigan does more damage due to an increase in magic. I think her sassiness also increases as well.
I'm not stupid, am I?
If you need to ask the question.
You win approval by getting on their good side when they're part of your group during dialogue conversations and giving them specific gifts that they like. The gifting is a nice option, especially when you need to mitigate the fact that not all of your dialogue choices are going to be universally liked by all your party members, so feel free to win your companion's favor by being materialistic. Not all gifts are approved equally though, so you'll have to carefully pick what characters like and properly give it to them, or risk disapproval. Alternatively, if you have the DLC, congratulations, you have a free ticket to 100% approval from everyone. On the whole, the role-playing aspects of Origin fit the RPG bill well, but it definitely feels a little standard at this point, especially since every other RPG game uses a similar system. So I wouldn't call these aspects of Origin the most standout feature. I think whether or not you prefer the skill check requirements over the skill checks like D&D that involve a little bit of RNG for example, is definitely up to preference. Same with the companion approval as well. Whether you care about these characters or not will ultimately determine your level of involvement with them, both on the gameplay and story front. Except for Doggo. Doggo is always there for me at every playthrough. The visuals are decent in just about every aspect. The environments, the models, the spell effects, all look okay, but you can definitely tell that the game did not age too well. Environmental designs are a bit on the simpler side, and the game often reuses level designs for other dungeons. Not to mention some assets and rooms get reused even in the same dungeon. It sometimes looks the same for a while, especially when you're in the same area for hours. The character models also feel a bit dull, and they start to look very doll-like, especially when you're talking to them up close. Your main character's emotions range from unemotional to stoic, and they honestly look like the most uninterested warden sometimes if you took them at visuals alone. You can even tell that the beard designs for the male characters are simply glued on, rather than having a natural look to them. There's also a number of model glitches and artifacts scattered throughout the game where character models look out of place in the world. A bit funny to me honestly, but sometimes it doesn't hold itself well when it needs to. The only other main issue is the constant crashing. Anytime a level was loaded or moving across the map, the game would occasionally crash straight to the desktop. The issues are apparently tied to the assets of the game, but even when I saw fixes on lowering the model detail or lowering the texture as well, it didn't really seem to help, so this was a bit annoying to have to deal with. I believe there is mod support to help fix this, but you should definitely be aware of this if you want to play Origins. All in all, not exactly Origin's strongest point, and the 15-year age does show in a lot of the visuals. Also there's blood. Lots of blood. On the sound front, the music, sound effects, and voice acting are all extremely good. The companions and NPCs have some of the best voice direction that you'll hear, and the actors really brought out the personalities of each of the characters.
Horror! Now, let us crush something into a fine paste before it starts to think I've gone all soft. Perish the thought.
Sound effect-wise, everything feels appropriate to the fantasy setting of Origins. From the sounds of swords clashing, magic spells being cast, to the visceral sounds of heads being decapitated, the foley and effects feel natural to hear. Ambient sound also feels natural to some of the game's environments where appropriate. The music is definitely one of the best parts of the game, and the mood setter outside of maybe the emotional tones of the voice acting. In combat, you'll hear not just atypical combat music, but music specific to different types of enemies, from Darkspawn to humans, to boss fights, there's a battle mood to emphasize the type of enemy that you're facing. Outside of combat, you'll hear more ambient music during the more calm sections of the game, either to emphasize the stillness, bareness, or hopelessness in the lands of Ferelden. Everything on the sound holds up, and the production really shows how much effort was put into making the fantasy setting of Origins feel alive and natural through the soundscape. So after finally coming back to Origins after a significant time away from the game, not to mention experiencing a number of games that came after it, it felt really fun to dive back into. The story and its world were definitely the most engrossing aspect for me, and it was fun to learn about the lore of Ferelden again, not to mention conversing with its characters. I think the world of Origin contains such a massive amount of lore that story-driven players will have fun trying to go back into it. Even when I've heard them before, it always felt engrossing to hear these stories again, especially just to see how my opinion of them has changed as I've gotten older. I had fun with the combat too. Finding spell combinations, managing the party, and defeating difficult enemies always felt rewarding, especially when you're able to get your team going and find the right combinations that work. I think if the world of Dragon Age still piques your curiosity, and the combat feels like something you could go for, there's definitely something to love about Origins. Not to mention, if you want to go down the franchise rabbit hole and see how your choices in Origins affect the later games, that's also good enough reason to go back. As for the game itself, I think Dragon Age Origins holds up very well, and it's still a fun game to play again, even after all these years. But that's gonna do it today for Dragon Age Origins, guys. Thanks for sticking around till the end. I'm most likely going to be playing another FPS title, but one that has a little more RPG focus, and you can probably find it under the sea. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you all next time.